In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to load data into a Databricks Lakehouse using Airbyte. We'll set up a Databricks Lakehouse destination, learn how to configure that with an existing Databricks cluster, and even create some simple queries using the Databricks Lakehouse platform. I'll be using Airbyte open source for this tutorial, but this also will work for Airbyte Cloud. There are going to be some prerequisites you'll need before we get started. First is obviously an instance of Airbyte running locally on your environment. So before you get into anything, make sure you head over to the Airbyte GitHub repo, clone it into your system, and then run that locally using Docker. Second, and to preface it, at the time of this recording, our Databricks destination only supports S3 as its storage. So make sure you have an AWS account ready to go. The third thing is we're going to need to create a Databricks cluster using our cloud provider. And that leads into our fourth prerequisite, which is also granting the correct permissions to your Databricks cluster within S3. I provided a doc below in the description that will show you exactly how to create the right roles, what permissions and bucket policies are needed, and then how to create an instance profile linking S3 to Databricks. This part is very, very crucial, as without having the correct permission set, you're going to have issues syncing data over to Databricks. But without further ado, let's get started. So first thing we have to do is spin up our Postgres server that's going to contain some data. That's what we'll use as our source to send data over into Databricks. So I'm going to run the following command in the terminal, and don't worry, I'll have all the commands we run in the description so that you can follow along. So I'm just going to paste this in, but this command pretty much is going to spin up a Postgres server on port 2000. And then once we run that command, we're going to populate it with some data. And now these Docker commands are going to insert some city data that we have, just a couple rows, a couple users. And once this is all done, then we can get started and set up the source in Airbyte. Now that we have our database, let's head over to Airbyte and set up the source. Like I mentioned before, make sure you have a local instance running of Airbyte. I have one here currently, so I'm going to head over to localhost port 8000 and get set up there. So we're going to head over to localhost port 8000, head over to the sources tab. Once you're all set up and enter in your email, you're going to head up to this tab called new source, click the button. And in here, you're going to type in Postgres, click that, and you're going to fill out the current fields. Name it whatever you want. This doesn't really matter as long as you know what this identifies it as. The host name is going to be localhost. This will obviously change if you're doing this in production. The port we set it to was 2000. The database name was Postgres. Schemas we can leave as public. Username, Postgres. And the password was password, but obviously if you change the command from the first initial command we used to init this database, then fill those in accordingly. And then down below, these are just going to be left blank. The replication mode we'll leave as standard. If you want something else with logical replication with CDC, go for it. But to keep things simple, I'm going to leave this as standard and then set up the source. Now, once that's done, you can see that we're sent to this page, and now we're going to add a destination, which is going to be Databricks. Let's go ahead and click the Add Destination button. We're going to add a new destination, and in the type, we're going to type in Databricks. Make sure you type in Databricks Lakehouse and not this one. Obviously, the name is going to depend again, however you want to identify this destination, but I'm going to leave it as the default Databricks Lakehouse. First thing you're going to want to do is agree and make sure this is checked to the JDBC drivers. Server host name. So a prerequisite to this was creating a Databricks cluster. Now let me show you where you can get all this information, but the docs will also be down below if you want to follow it that way. So once you are in your workspace, let's head over to the compute tab on the left-hand side and head over to the cluster that you created. Once you're in there, head on down to the advanced options tab, scroll down, and then if you head over to the JDBC/ODBC tab, that is where you're going to get all the information to fill out in Airbyte. So let's click this. And then the two most important fields that we're going to pull from is going to be the server host name and the HTTP path. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the server host name, copy that over, head back into Airbyte, and I'm going to paste that in as my server host name. It's going to ask for my HTTP path, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to go down here, grab my HTTP path, copy and paste. Now that those are filled out, we see port 443. We can leave it as that unless in the cluster details, this port is different. So fill it out accordingly. Access token. We're going to need to create a Databricks access token, and that's pretty simple as well. You're going to go back to the Databricks workspace, go into settings, user settings, go head over to the access tokens tab, and this is where you can generate a new token. Once that token is generated, then we're going to copy this access token and paste it in. Once that's pasted in, database schema will also stay public. This down here in the data source section, this is where we're going to fill out the details of our S3 bucket. In the S3 bucket name, we're going to fill out whatever the S3 bucket's name is. In my case, it's going to be JChal31. The S3 bucket path, this can be realistically any folder path you want to set it down to, but remember this path whenever you set it. I'm going to leave it as the default, which is data_sync/test. S3 bucket region, wherever the bucket is located or whatever the instance is running on. For my case, I'm using US West, but obviously select as appropriate for you. Now for the S3 access key ID and secret access key, you're going to head over to your S3 instance. You're going to go over to services, IAM, and then pull or create an access key and paste both of those in. Now remember, one of the key things I mentioned at the beginning of this video is that you created the proper roles, added the correct bucket policies, and made sure that role had correct access to Databricks. This is going to be the part where you may run into issues if you did not set that up properly. If you didn't and you're running into errors, make sure you follow the doc that I listed below to make sure that the correct permissions are added. Lastly, what you're gonna make sure to do is check this purge staging files and tables option to true. And then once you're done there, you should be good to go. Click set up the destination, and then it should make sure that everything checks out and you're connecting to your Databricks instance properly. Now, once all of that checks out and you're all good to go, let's hit new connection up here in the connections tab. We're going to select our existing source, which is Postgres, use existing source. It'll send us over to the destination tab, and we're going to select an existing destination, which is our Databricks Lakehouse, and then use existing destination. Now we're set up here to this page where we can do a couple things. Firstly is going to be the connection name. Obviously name this however you want, so that way you and or your team can identify what this connector is doing. The next one is going to be replication frequency. So you can set this up to whatever you want and how frequent you want the replications to happen. For this purpose, we're going to leave it as manual because we want to manually trigger these syncs just for testing purposes. Destination namespace, we're going to leave it to mirror source structure. And then here in destination stream prefix, this is completely optional, but if you wanted to prefix your data streams with anything, you can do that here. So you can see down here in our streams, we have cities and users. Those are the stream names. For this purpose, we're going to say tutorial underscore. And so effectively, when the sync goes through, our stream names are going to be prefixed as tutorial underscore cities and tutorial underscore users. And the last thing we can do is set up the sync mode. If you click on this tab, you can see what each stream will support. In our case for cities, it supports full refresh overwrite or full refresh append. I'm going to leave it to full refresh overwrite in this case. And then for the user stream, we actually have incremental append, which I'm going to select since we have an ID field that we can use for the incremental aspect. And now that we're done with setting this all up, we're going to click setup connection and you're sent here. We're going to sync now and let that run the sync. You can keep an eye on the logs to make sure everything is working properly and that your sync is going through. So now in the logs, you can see that our run succeeded. It took around 4 minutes and 28 seconds. And, if anything also goes wrong in the logs, you can definitely take a look. Usually with this case, it is most likely going to be permissions access that gets denied and ultimately fails this run if you did not set it up properly. But anyways, now that this sync is complete, let's head over to S3 to take a look at what data was sent in to the bucket. So now that I'm in my bucket, you can see that the data_sync folder was created, which is what we created in the bucket path in Airbyte. So let's click into that. We see that test is also a folder there, so let's click that. Now this is the public schema that was set for both Postgres as well as Databricks. So we're gonna head into this folder, and this is where we can see both the tutorial underscore cities and tutorial underscore users directories that now have been synced from Postgres into our S3 bucket, which effectively is now in our Databricks cluster. If we, for example, click into this directory, we're going to notice two files that we should take note of. The first one is going to be the _delta_log. This is what contains our Delta Lake transaction log and holds a bunch of information on what transactions go down. And this snappy.parquet file is what holds the content of our source data. So this is where everything is stored. So now that we've confirmed our data has been sent correctly, let's head over to Databricks go into our workspace, open up the cluster, and start querying some of the data using Databricks notebooks. So I'm going to head over here to our account console, and this is where my workspace is located. So I'm actually going to go up here and open our workspace. Once we're in this screen, one thing to make sure of is that up here in this tab, you're selecting data science and engineering. Once you're good, you're going to see create a notebook here. So let's go ahead and create a notebook. Here we can name it whatever. I'm going to say test notebook. The default language I'm going to leave as Python, and then make sure you select the correct cluster that you've created. More likely than not, it'll just be the one that is running, since when you sync Airbyte, it forces your cluster to turn on. So once that's selected, let's hit create, and then we're brought into this prompt. You can see that we have our first command, so let's run our first command and start querying data. And once again, I'm going to just copy and paste this command, but I will also leave it in the description. This command, this dbutil.fs.ls command, is what essentially will just list all the directories located in the path that we give it in the argument. So this path is directly looking into my S3 bucket in the jchow31 bucket name and going down all the way to the public directory. And so if I hit shift enter, then we can see that this just ran and it'll list all of the 4 directories that were listed inside of it, but we only really care about these 2, the ones that we just created, which is tutorial_cities and tutorial_users. Now we have a second command prompt down here, and what I'm going to do here is actually visualize the data that's located in the S3 bucket in the Databricks platform using Python. So I'm going to copy and paste, but again, it'll be located in the description. I'm going to create a variable called df, and what it's essentially going to do is it's going to read and load from the destination/directory path that we give it in the argument. And so instead of cities, I'm actually going to name it tutorial_cities instead. And then we're going to display the variable df that contains all of the data listed in this directory. And so if I hit shift enter again, it's going to run. And as you can see, we can visualize all the data in a table directly from the tutorial_cities directory. So this was the data that was sent over from Postgres using Airbyte directly into Databricks. And now you can see the power of what we can do with the Databricks platform. We can create some simple BI dashboards, create some extensive analytics, or even some sophisticated Python or machine learning logic all within this notebook. But that's going to do it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned something new and saw how the power of sending data over from a source to Databricks using Airbyte. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this is also available on Airbyte Cloud, which is our cloud offering. Go ahead and check that out if you don't want to run open source and host this on your own. But anyways, we'll see you in another video. Thank you for watching. Peace.